Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending today's webinar. My name is Tom Robbins. I'm with Ken2Go, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us for our fantastic webinar looking at future web design. For those of you who aren't aware, Ken2Go CMS7 has integrated with 51Degrees.mobi, which is a fantastic technology partner of ours. As we focused a lot, obviously, not only on the industry, but also within Ken2Go on mobile and better ways that we can provide that. And joining me today is James, who is the founder and CEO of 51Degrees.mobi, who has been kind enough to join us today and provide his thoughts around future web design and some of the things that we should be looking at and why things like responsive design and server-side detection are so incredibly important for companies today. So with further ado, I'm going to hand it over to James. James, are you there?
I hope so.
Great.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hello, everybody. So just a little bit on 51 Degrees to start with. We founded this open source project in 2009. We look at device detection, understanding the characteristics and capabilities of devices accessing a website, provide tools to optimize the response, and provide analytics so we can see what's going on in this ever-changing world. Some of the key metrics are about the company. We've deployed on 320,000 servers, processing 690 million unique devices a month. We can process up to 5 million detections a second to 99.9% accuracy and 12,000 device combinations contained in the database. So market leading by all the measures defined within our particular industry. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, I'd like to start by looking at device capabilities and how they've evolved, where they are today and what we can expect tomorrow, how we use these devices, how our usage patterns are changing, the consequences of both the evolving device technologies and how we use them, looking at the pace of change and what we can expect to see in the future, before then coming back to today, looking at some real examples of how websites are using the latest technology in a very simple way to achieve good results. Looking at the role of responsive design, certainly we don't see it as a fix-all solution, and looking at a simple strategy to deal with the way that devices are likely to evolve into the future, before looking further into the future and some of the considerations we need to bear in mind there. So just to start with, I'd like to look at the capabilities of a human being versus our machines. As human beings, we have the ability to reach out into the world and touch it and interact with it. We can see what's going on, and we can hear what's happening around us. We can talk and interact with each other. In contrast, our machines, well, they have inputs, they have keyboards, so we can touch them. They have mice. We can now start to touch them and actually interact with the screens. We can talk to them now. They can listen to us. I don't just mean recording audio like you could be doing during this webinar. I mean, they're starting to be able to understand what we're saying. I see Apple Siri as a good example of that. They can start to see us. So the Xbox Kinect has been fantastically popular, where you become the controller. And modern Android devices running version 4 of Android upwards have the ability for this face unlock feature, where they're actually using our faces as a way of recognizing who we are and authenticating us. Outputs, well, LEDs, I like LEDs, I like the Altair 8800, still actually really popular. We can tell if things are on or they've got messages for us. LEDs are still being used to that effect. The screens, we're used to them. Speakers, so we can hear what the machines are saying. They can vibrate, so mobile phones in particular have had the ability to vibrate for 10 years plus now to interact with us. And their capabilities, well, if we go back to the early 80s, we had the Apple Macintosh, really the first really usable personal computer with a mouse. IBM then kind of innovated on top of that by bringing out the ThinkPad and changing the mouse input to this sort of little nipple joystick thing and touchpads. Nokia at the end of the 90s produced the 7110, the first phone that could actually connect to the internet and get data other than just text messages. They then, in the middle of the last decade, started to develop this capability of knowing where they were without actually having been there, both through GPS and assisted GPS and all these sorts of technologies. The iPhone then came along in 2007, late 2007, 2008, and really changed things again with the touch screen interface. Others had tried it before, but the iPhone really sort of spearheaded the mainstream adoption. And our TVs are starting to change. If you followed CES the other week, the Consumer Electronics Show, it's all about not just higher resolutions, but being able to interact via the television. And computers are getting onto our fridges. Samsung now have Android integrated into a range of fridges. So they're getting everywhere. In looking forward, we've got Google Glass, which is starting to receive a little bit more mainstream interest, and that's going to be a very popular way in, I'm not saying a year's time or 2 years' time, I think it's going to be a lot longer than that, but it is going to become a way that we interact with our digital world, and our digital world and real world come together. So just looking at these things on a timeline, well, the Apple Macintosh, 1984, not a lot really happened in the 90s. Things got faster and more powerful, but it was really the advent of the IBM ThinkPad that changed things, and we started to see laptops coming in. And then the mobile phone evolved at the end of the 90s, the Nokia 7110, location awareness, well, middle of the last decade, depending on when you want to record these things on mobile phones. The iPhone, which most of us know and love. I've put laptops in again because it was actually 2008 that the laptop started to outsell the desktop computer. So that meant from 2009 onwards, more of our computing devices that we were buying as consumers or using in our businesses were mobile devices. We could take them with us. They weren't tied down with wires to the desktop. The TV, really web TV, where it's actually been integrated into the TV, only really in the last couple of years. Connect 18 months, 2 years ago, Siri last year. So things have changed quite a lot over the last few years. And in the last 5 years, we can see that our devices have got this ability now where we can touch them and interact with them, and they know their location. That's only in the last 5 years. And in the last 2 years, they've developed the ability to be able to see us and hear us. So if I just flick back to that timeline, there's some major changes in the capabilities of our devices that have only just started to come into mainstream technology, and we still haven't really got our heads around how we're going to use all these new capabilities. And that's in contrast to, as I say, the previous 15 plus years, where actually the pace of innovation and the pace of change was relatively small. So mobile is only just beginning, and mobile is only just the start as we look at different types of mobile devices and different types of devices that we're going to interact with. Let's now look at the changing usage. I've been through how devices have changed and how they now kind of compare to us with the inputs and outputs and the way they can interact, at least in a very basic and kind of rudimentary way to start with. So we can take our laptops out and about with us. We expect to be able to perform our digital tasks pretty much wherever we are, whether that's out in a cafe, or whether we're sitting on a train or public transport. We want to be able to use our phones. We want to be able to use our laptops. Increasingly, when we're sitting at home, we're not just looking at one screen, we're looking at two screens. So you might be watching television, you might then be sending a text message to a friend, or browsing and performing some e-commerce activities on a tablet or on a laptop in parallel. So we're starting to see more screens penetrating our lives, and we're starting to use those screens at multiple screens at the same time. These devices are now getting into our cars. We have satellite navigation, and we really haven't even started to really touch the surface of how we're going to interact with businesses when we're driving, when we're not being able to use all our senses, all our capabilities to interact with our devices, and I'll come back to that later on. Devices can see. The most simple way a device can see what's happening is QR codes and barcodes. But it's becoming an increasingly popular way of linking the real world to the digital world. And we can start to pay for things with our mobile devices. With the increase of NFC in particular, we can now use these devices as credit cards, effectively, as a payment mechanism. We're tending to focus on using that capability in the real world, but I'd like to think that we can start to use the integrated payment mechanism in mobile phones and mobile devices in the digital world soon as well. So why is all this important? Why have I started by sort of stepping back from the web? Well, the reality is most of us have got websites that have already been built and they've been designed for the keyboard, mouse and the big screen. And although it's very popular and it attracts a lot of headlines, and I think a lot of bloggers and journalists and people have sort of focused on it, the message mobile first, well actually that message is great, but there's actually very few of us that have projects where we haven't got some sort of legacy environment, whether that's legacy content or a content management system. And actually I think probably legacy is the wrong word. It is what we use to manage our content. And it doesn't make business sense to go back and say, okay, we'll tear it all down and start again. Very few businesses have the budget for that. Yes, if you're a technology startup and you don't have any of this technology or any of this previous investment, then perhaps that makes sense. But for very few businesses can we truly say, okay, mobile first. We can certainly start thinking about mobile and start thinking about mobile and the future in our thinking, but we're not kind of in that world for most of us at any rate. So these websites that we've got, well, they've primarily been designed around two operating systems. Most of them have been the Microsoft-based operating system. It's very easy for CIOs and IT managers over the last 15, 18 years. In businesses, you just buy Microsoft because there really isn't a credible alternative, and it's nice and safe. And Apple has obviously crept in over the last few years and is doing a great job at trying to break down that monopoly, particularly in the non-desktop world. But I digress slightly. If we look at browsers, 5 main browsers. Most of us who develop websites will be testing them on these browsers for the desktop devices. So what does this mean when we take this sort of these browsers and the design for desktop and everything? Well, we get websites like this. This is Telefonica. Telefonica are actually a very large mobile network, although not particularly big in North America. They're very big in South America and Spain and the UK, among other countries. And this is their main website. And it looks very nice on a laptop, looks very nice on a desktop. There's lots of content. They draw your eye to the latest news and the results and that kind of thing. But if we look at these those sorts of websites on a small screen phone, particularly a feature phone, which is still very popular in the developing world. If anyone's creating content that's viewed in developing worlds, then the small screen, very basic feature phone is by far the most popular way of accessing the internet, and very often people's first way of accessing the internet. There's no kind of broadband or laptops or desktops already deployed. This is the first experience. So it doesn't look very good there. If we look at it on a smartphone, we can see when we first load this up on a smartphone device, we get the whole screen. So the first thing the user has to do is say, well, what do I want? Okay, I can kind of squint. I might be able to see some of the text, but not all of it. I can see some of the images. I might have to guess a little bit about what they are. So pinch and zoom comes in, and we can start to zoom in on the page, and we can scroll around it, and we get a better idea of what's going on. But we're throwing a huge amount of options at people into a very, very small space, and it's not really ideal. The links can be then hard to touch, and there's more faffing around that's needed as we have to zoom in and out on links and touch different parts of the screen. So it's not ideal. If we look at the pace of change now, and just how our technology landscape is changing, well, Microsoft's dominance just over the last 15 months in just desktop browsing has really been eroded by Google in particular. You can just see that graph. I think it sort of speaks for itself. Just in the desktop and laptop spaces for browsers, there's a lot of change. If we look at screen sizes, they're changing now as well in the mobile space. 3.5 inches is becoming more popular, starting to drop off a little bit. The larger screen, 4-inch plus devices are starting to gain more prominence as well. And that is just going to keep changing. The phablet, that's tablet, but spelt with a P at the beginning, PH at the beginning instead of a T, so a phone and a tablet, The 5 to 7-inch devices, they're set to double this year. Things like the Samsung Galaxy Note, the sales of those type of devices is going to double, which gives us even more physical screen sizes that we need to consider and worry about. Let's just look at the market differences now as well. So BlackBerry pretty much written off a year ago, maybe still written off by people, but in the UK in particular, BlackBerry has still retained significant market share of web usage. Over 15% of web activity is coming from BlackBerry devices in the UK, less so in other European countries, but there are still markets where BlackBerry is strong, and is very much the third ecosystem. So if you're producing content for mobile devices, you want to target mobile devices, BlackBerry is still very important today. BlackBerry 10 comes out next week. All the major networks are going to be carrying these devices, and increasingly analysts are being very positive about the return of BlackBerry. Of course, we also have Windows Phone as well, which is slowly but surely starting to get back into the game. If we look at India, so that was the UK and Europe I was just looking at. If we look at India, Nokia devices still the most popular. Interestingly, Nokia is the biggest brand of all brands in India, more than McDonald's and Coca-Cola. Nokia are just huge in India, and for them to have lost the market share that they've lost over the last 15 months is a huge deal to Nokia, and Samsung have been particularly good at picking up on that. Apple also now have their marketing and their pricing sorted out for developing countries as well, so they're starting to gain market share in India. But Nokia is still very significant, and the Lumia devices, the Windows Phone devices, are a significant part of their kind of re-emergence, particularly in developing countries. So today, let's just look at some of the websites that kind of bring all the things I've just been talking about, the changes in devices, the changes in usage, the changes in capabilities, and some of the problems with the way that our websites have been designed in the past, and solve some of these problems before I start to look at how we can actually go about doing this. What's a sensible strategy? So Galaxy Chocolate, they're a very popular chocolate brand in the UK, and they have a very simple website that is designed to take a voucher code that is printed on the inside of a chocolate bar. So you open your chocolate bar, inside there's a voucher code. Their whole purpose of their website is to capture that voucher code so that you can enter a competition, and then you might win things from free holidays to extra bars of chocolate to spa treatments, luxury things that perhaps most of us wouldn't be buying in a normal year. So there's a big incentive to enter the competition, and the website itself is very simple. It's just trying to capture two things. It's capturing the voucher code to confirm you bought the chocolate bar, and it's also capturing some sort of contact information so that you can get back to you if you've won. So on the big screen website, we have the pink area in the middle, are you a winner, getting you to enter your code, and around that is all these nice enticing images and a small bit of text to sort of tell you this is why you should enter it. These are the things that you could win. But on the big screen, on the small screen device, sorry, still the same focus, still the same task that we're trying to achieve, but without all the stuff around the side, the glitz around the side. And the way Galaxy Chocolate do that is simply to determine what type of device it is. Is it a small screen device or is it a big screen device? And to send different content to the device. They've not entirely used responsive design to do this. They're using server-side detection in order to determine what the device is capable of and to send the appropriate information. Moving on, Subway, a brand I suspect everyone is familiar with. They have, again, the same website, the web address, but the landing page on the mobile device takes you to a page that's a little bit more focused on the menu and getting to your nearest store. And in fact, since I put these slides together, they've changed the menu, the landing page again on mobile, so it's entirely about getting you to the nearest store. So it's just a single question, which is where are you? And you either press the button to use location services to find out where you are, and it will tell you where the nearest store is when it's open. And I think there's even then a link to the menu as well, but even more basic than what I'm showing you here on the screen in front of you. Whereas the big screen there's a lot more menus, there's a lot more features about Lewis Smith, how you can find out more about Subway, whereas the mobile one, it's a more focused set of messages. There's a more discrete set of tasks that we're being driven towards. Prime Location, this is a big property portal in the UK, real estate, one of the major areas anyone who's sort of looking to rent or buy a home would go and look at property information, what's for sale. So the big screen, very much focused on editorial, information about trends and housing prices and that sort of thing. You come to the mobile screen and it's very much, where are you now? Let's help you start finding property in your immediate area. So the way the screen is presented, the way the content is presented is very different across the two pages. So they're really understanding the context and starting to make some assumptions about what the user is going to want to do based on the device that they're accessing, as well as changing the way that the content is presented to suit that device and make it more appropriate. And they're just three examples. There are many others that I could talk more about, but all along a similar theme. So the role of responsive design, I kind of touched on it just now. So responsive design it really is about taking all the latest technologies, generally being referred to as HTML5, CSS3, media queries. You then have frameworks that kind of, I think, come into this space of responsive design and can be used in this area of responsive design, jQuery Mobile being one of the most popular. And one of the things we've found with all these technologies is they have to be loaded onto the phone. They have to get to the phone or the device, the web browser, before they can start being used. I guess that's a fairly dumb statement to make, but reasonably obvious. So they have to get there. And one of the problems with a mobile device is the bandwidth is exceptionally variable. It's great in an office if it's just a few of you and there's a Wi-Fi connection, or you happen to be the only person on the 3G cell, or you happen to have one of the first LTE phones and no one else has got an LTE phone in the area, so you don't have the contention, and you get extremely good performance. But really the performance of a mobile device from a data connection point of view is exceptionally variable, and I think that is often forgotten. And one of the problems with these technologies is that they take a lot of data. So I was looking at a homepage the other day on a mobile site that had just been launched, and the homepage was 450K. That's how much data needed to be transferred to the homepage in order for it just to start rendering. And all it rendered was 7 links. So a menu of 7 items, 450K, and the load time was about 30 seconds where I was, which was sitting in a building, not particularly great coverage, but not dire coverage either. It wasn't like I was kind of on a speeding train or something like that. And I think we've got to be very careful when we use responsive design to make sure we're using the technologies appropriately. And I kind of highlight that, as I say now, to highlight that mobile bottleneck, that data bottleneck, and that is not, in my opinion, going to be solved by LTE. LTE will make it better in certain situations, but the sort of kind of joke in the mobile industry is you go to Mobile World Congress, which is taking place in Barcelona at the end of February, and you can't get a mobile signal in that venue. You can't even get a Wi-Fi signal. It's just because there are too many devices all trying to connect at the same time, and it just overloads the networks. That's the industry's main event, and those sorts of problems occur. I'm sure we've all been to trade shows and things like that with similar issues. So really, there's this sort of speed issue that I really want to highlight that I think sometimes we forget. One of my top tips around responsive design, and when you know that you might want to think about whether you're using it appropriately, is when you use, and I'm sorry I don't know the background for everyone, but display as a CSS attribute that can be used to determine how things are displayed on screen. It's been around for a long time. It's not a a recent attribute. It kind of goes back 10 years plus, I think. But display none is often used when the screen size shrinks. So if you're looking at, say, a 3.5-inch screen, and you might say, okay, well, with responsive design, there's actually some bits of the page I'm just going to turn off now. I just don't want to display these things. Perhaps there's some images of people's faces on a biography, and you think, actually, I don't want to display that now. I just want to focus on the text. So in your responsive design media query, you'll say, okay, if the screen is less than a particular size, then use display none to turn that image off. Now, that gives you the result you want as a designer, but guess what? That image is still being downloaded in the background. So we have this situation when display none is being used, where that particular area that we're turning off on the client, within the browser, is still being downloaded in the background, and that can have a significant impact on performance, because we have this limited data connection, or variable data connection, which can and very often is limited for people, and we're then forcing the browser to download things that it just doesn't need. It's just not a very sensible thing to do. So around sort of responsive design, if you find yourself using display none, really think about, are you doing things in the right way? So really, one size just doesn't always fit all. Now let's just look at a strategy and some very simple things we've developed over the years to try and work out kind of which technologies to use. So in the past, we've had desktop, and that's been mouse and keyboard, very simple, the things we've had to consider. If we now look at sort of 2013, everyone really needs to be considering the mobile phone and the tablet, and really treating mobile phone and tablet as different things. They've got different screen sizes, their usage scenarios are different, so therefore we should consider them as separate things, rather than just creating a mobile site that works on one and expecting it to work on the other. We've then got TVs coming in after that, so we need to consider input methods and interaction methods of voice and gesture. It won't be long before we're all waving at our televisions and swiping our hands left and right in order to navigate around the page, navigate our content. And finally, with glasses coming in, this kind of third stage is really considering glasses and proper speech interaction, and that's not sort of speech interaction like we might deal with a desktop browser today. I'm talking about sort of walking down the street and being able to just talk, and the screen changing on our glasses, sort of heads-up display. I can't tell you exactly how those TV glasses and speech things are going to work. I think there's still a lot of evolution that's got to take place there. We haven't really even seen the first version of these being delivered to consumers, and we know you just have to look at the mobile phone and how that evolved in its first 10 years of life to see that what we see to start with is not going to be what we're going to be using in 10 years' time. But we certainly need to be considering these changes and making sure that our content is structured in such a way, and our organizations and our technologies are structured in such a way so that we can easily support the capabilities of these different devices and the way that users are going to want to interact with them. So looking at our current site, and I'm just taking mobile as a comparison, we could take any one of those other columns, but I'll take mobile as that's the one that's most significant to people today, is really to start with, look at where your two sites compare to one another. So if the page content and the navigation is the same, I was going to use the pointer, I won't bother with that. But if it's the same, you're really in this position where we can just alter the layout of the page to deal with the different screen sizes. So if the navigation is the same, let's say there are only 7 items that people can link to off a page, and the content on those pages is going to be exactly the same, then all we need to do is alter the layout, rather than laying things out left to right, we might lay them out top to bottom. However, if there are differences in the mobile experience, either in the navigation, perhaps if I go back to that Telefonica example where there were hundreds of links on the home page that just don't make any sense on a mobile screen, then you might want to have different navigation structure for a mobile site compared to your existing site. Or if the page content is going to be different. So an example would be an e-commerce site where on a desktop site you might have 5 rows of 5 for your products on a page, so 25 items on a page. But on a mobile screen, a 3.5-inch screen, you just want to have 5 items laid out one under the other, and those other 20 items you'll navigate to them as a separate activity. So the content of the page is going to be different. Or if those two, both the navigation and the page content is going to be different, then we can't just alter the layout. We need to be doing something differently in the way that we serve those pages to our users. So really, responsive design comes in and is fantastic where all you're looking to do is alter the layout. Everything on the page is the same, the navigation's the same, the content's the same. All we want to do is move some things around. So say, rather than left to right, we lay things out top to bottom. But as soon as we start dealing with those other scenarios, then we really need to be looking at what the server can do, what we can change within our content management systems in order to structure the layout of our pages differently for different types of devices and different navigation and different usage scenarios, different page content. So just an example of that, thephonecast.com, spelt with an F, is a popular news site in the UK that I run with a number of other people within the mobile industry. And we've structured this website. It's a news website. On the home page, we want to draw attention to the latest stories, and we want to draw attention to the podcasts that we produce on a weekly basis. But if we were to try and recreate that, or try and use responsive design to shrink that down or lay it out differently on a mobile device, we'd end up in trouble. And there's two things I want to sort of draw your attention to. The first is by trying to promote too many things on the home page, we're just going to waste the user's time because they're going to have, it's going to take longer to load the page, and as they scroll down the page, they're going to kind of think, well, when's this thing going to end? So we want to be quite punchy on our mobile site, just focus the user on the mobile stories, on the stories, on the major news items, and then allow them to navigate around the site as well. So the navigation is quite different on mobile to on the desktop device. And then the other change, another top tip, is really around the advertising. We make some of our revenue from this site from advertising, and the best way to advertise on a smartphone is a little banner that stays there at the top or bottom of the screen, and there's just one advert that appears on the page. That advert can change as people move around the website, but that advert just stays there statically at the top or bottom of the page. Whereas on a traditional website, we would use bigger banner adverts. We might have multiple adverts on the page as well. As people scroll around, they can see more advertising, but that just doesn't work on a mobile device. So there are some quite fundamental differences, as I say, between the desktop big screen version of a website and the small screen version. And if you look at the growth of advertising revenue, focusing on small screen advertising is very important if anyone makes their money from advertising. So let's have a look to tomorrow. We've looked at a little bit about what we can do today, how our devices are evolving, what's the future got in store for us. Well, one company in particular has kind of brought some of this technology together already. They've brought together authentication through being able to see who you are. They've brought together payment and the fact that you can now use a mobile device to pay for things. And they've brought together location, the fact that if you're interacting with a business from your home and then the same person is interacting with that business digitally when they're out and about, you want to create a different experience. And the example I'm referring to is Starbucks and Square. So we're now in this fantastic world where we can walk in to Starbucks, and Starbucks will know that we've walked into the store because our phone has broadcast a signal to say, "Hello Starbucks, I'm here." You then walk up to the till, and the person who's preparing the coffee can see a picture of you because the phone's already been registered. You've already kind of entered into this interaction with Starbucks. The person can see who you are. They can see a picture of you. They can ask you, "Would you like your usual order?" At which point you could say, "Yes, I would like my regular morning coffee, please." And the transaction is complete. You've approved Starbucks if you're in Starbucks, if you're actually in the location, and the person behind the till has authenticated you by looking at a picture of you and looking at you in real life. They've authenticated you, so they know. So that side of the transaction has been complete. You've authorized Starbucks to take a little bit of money from you. Obviously, if we were talking about hundreds of dollars, that's not really any sort of coffee I'm used to, but a couple of dollars for you for the coffee, and the transaction's been completed. You've benefited as a consumer because the process has been considerably simpler. You haven't had to get any cash. You haven't had to do anything other than simply confirm your order. And Starbucks have benefited because the transaction time is quicker, which is key in any sort of very high volume retail environment. So those technologies that I talked about at the very beginning, these new capabilities are starting to be deployed in some really interesting ways. Now, the example I just referred to, of course, is not an entirely web-based scenario, but I think a lot of the enabling technology is going to become transferable, and we're going to have to think about how we can change our business processes to make them easier. The one that I think is most ripe for changing is authentication. Having to enter a username and password in order to authenticate yourself with a website is a time-consuming task, and I think is really going to be the kind of next major area on the internet for change. Whether Facebook or Twitter succeed in driving us to use their authentication methods sort of remains to be seen, but I certainly think it's an area that's is overdue for some enhancement. So that's really what's just around the corner and what Square and Starbucks are working on already today. Let's look at our televisions. Well, one of the things that I find sort of quite interesting about a TV is you tend to look at it from a greater distance, so you're further away. And actually, if you look at roughly the sort of screen size, that's comparable to a modern smartphone when viewed perhaps a couple of feet away from your face, and a TV that's maybe 3 or 4 meters across a living room. So you think, okay, that's great, responsive design, fantastic. We can position the information in exactly the same way on a smartphone and on a TV because the actual sort of size of the screen that you're going to view is going to be roughly the same. Well, there's some problems there, I think, and the main one is that we don't have giant hands to reach across the living room with massive sort of fingers to interact. We're going to interact in a different way. We're not going to be touching our TV screens. The reality is we're going to be waving at them and using gestures, and we're going to be opening and closing the sort of palm of our hands in order to select something and to make a decision. We're going to be taking the TV is going to be watching us, and it's going to know which one's our right hand and which one's our left hand, and as we make a gesture where we move one to the left or we move one to the right, that's going to provide a signal to the TV. So there's lots of similarities between the way that we present our content for a smartphone today and in the future on a television, but there's going to be some quite significant differences as well. And again, I think it's important that we recognize in our strategy today that this is just around the corner. It's not something that we need to be overly worried about in 2013 in terms of actually doing things, unless you happen to be in an industry that's very predominantly sort of TV focused. But it is something to consider for 2014. and ensure that the way that you change your content and the tools that you're using in order to manage your content, making sure that they're going to be able to kind of work in this new world, which is, as I say, not very far away. Moving on, so a few more years into the future, well, our devices are going to be totally intelligent, like Star Trek, and we'll just be able to talk to them, and they'll be able to talk back to us, and it'll all be straightforward, and there won't be a need. Okay, that's probably not the case. There is going to be a need for websites, and it's not going to happen that quickly. So what will happen in a few years' time? Well, I'd like to come back to the car scenario. At the moment, we all use our sat-navs in cars to help us get from A to B. They save a lot of arguments. I certainly have less arguments with my wife now that we have satellite navigation when it comes to big car journeys with the family. But we're really not interacting with our device when we're in the car. And wouldn't it be amazing if we could just say, phone, navigate me to the nearest coffee shop, and the phone just worked out, right, yeah, okay, where are we, where's the nearest coffee shop, I'll change the route. It then comes back and says, wouldn't you like to, the nearest coffee shop is X, I'm going to use Costa Coffee, which is another one because there are other brands than Starbucks available, and it says, would you like to go there, it's a 10-minute detour, and then it says, would you like me to place an order? So when you get there, you can just walk out, go in, and your coffee is going to be ready for you. And the sat-nav is continually keeping the store up to date with how far away you are so they can get the coffee to be ready for you within a minute of you getting there, for example. That's the kind of usage in the sort of car environment with a voice interface where there's no screen that I think is going to be extremely compelling for consumers. It's going to be compelling for businesses, and it's going to bring together technology we haven't even really touched on in the last sort of half hour, 40 minutes, the search engines and all that technology coming together. And the website is just, something that sort of sits around the side of it. But it's all that technology, all that content, all that information that we're going to be interacting with in a different way. And then we've got the sort of heads-up display for our digital lives, allowing us to bring the two together. I'm a bit worried that we're all going to be sitting around in a bar vacantly looking at one another, not really paying attention as we're watching a YouTube video in our left eye or something like that. But I think this is to say, less well defined exactly how this is going to kind of integrate into society. And as I said earlier, I don't think this is going to happen in a year or 2 years. It's going to take a lot longer. But it is coming, and we are going to have to look at how we present our content in this environment. And again, having a strategy that allows us to separate the different types of devices and how we interact with them is going to make our lives a lot easier as technologists and business people. So in summary, I think our home pages and the concept of a home page, a static home page that just does one thing, it is really going to become a thing of the past. I think our websites are we need to treat them more as concierges, where they're picking up on the clues that we're providing and also the questions that they're asking in order to determine what we want to do, what information we require. So some of those clues would be the location, the type of device, our previous history, what we've done previously in that environment. And then they might ask questions like, are you interested in finding the nearest store, shopping online, whatever it might be. So this sort of concept of a static home page is eroded. And in order to sort of help start to achieve that, we need to look at design, so make sure that we're understanding the user's context, we're understanding the device and the capabilities of that device, everything from physically what it's able to do to what type of data connection has it got or is it likely to have. And then make sure we optimize our processes so that we create happy users, happy people, and then we also look at making sure we're generating the best opportunity for us. So an e-commerce site, that might mean selling more. And if you make money from advertising, keeping people on the site for longer, or optimizing your advertising so that it becomes more effective. Making sure we're making the most of the opportunity. And in order to do that, there are a number of enablers. So I think we need to look at flexible content, making sure that we're not just designing for a particular type of device, we're making sure our content can be deployed not just on different screen sizes, but even considering looking at audio, for example, and making sure we've got perhaps audio clips and video clips of certain types of content. That's a very engaging way to deliver a message on a small screen, for example. And the cost of delivering content in those methods and creating content in those ways is reducing. Business intelligence, so understanding what people have done before, how they've interacted with different screens, and their sort of total interaction with us, not just through the website, but perhaps through call centers and other ways of interacting with the business are going to become important. Easy authentication. I said previously, passwords and usernames I think are up for review. The lifetime is coming to an end. Payment mechanisms. So very much the focus of the payment industry has been around facilitating micropayments in the real world, and there's been various attempts at trying to do that online, and I think that'll be the sort of next payment enabler. So when you get to the checkout, if you're on a mobile device, you don't have to then enter a fiddly credit card and a CVV number, and then depending on who you use as your credit card provider, going to a website where they ask you a load of other questions. It's a very clunky process. It's not intuitive. So the ability to just press a button and pay. The company that I think is leading the way in this area is Amazon, where you've registered your credit card details for continuous authorization. Once you've been authenticated online, actually checking out online is a very straightforward process, and more of us will want to have that capability. And then the final enabler is optimizing the organization. So the kind of scenarios that I've been talking about and I envisage in the future are going to require organizations to be exceptionally efficient. Anyone who's still having a debate about whether the website's about selling things or whether it's about marketing or about customer care, and who owns the website and how the website interacts with different other parts of the business, now is really the time to sort of get those arguments sorted out and prepare the organization to deal with these exciting changes that are just around the corner. So just sort of finally, as I sort of think about all of this, accessibility is something that's kind of often overlooked. And as I put these slides together, I did think about the positioning of speech and being able to interact entirely with a website via voice and the requirements of accessibility. And I think these changes in technology are really going to help us support people with visual impairments, hearing impaired, more effectively, because they're going to force us to think about some of those things. But I think the reality is a lot of websites don't really give enough consideration to this particular subject. So I think generally it's very tangential at the end, but I think the considerations for accessibility are going to become more important. And now might be a good time to sort of just have a look and think about, how does your website work in those areas, and perhaps maybe we should think about accelerating some of the changes and making sure that we're meeting the sort of best practice in that area now, because that will help in the future. So we've talked a bit about device capabilities, how they're changing, how we use our devices, how our usage of devices is changing, some of the consequences for websites, and how even some of the biggest organizations are not really embracing this change, how the pace of change is increasing, and the solutions that are available today. I've showed you some examples, looked at the responsive design at quite a high level, where it has a role in altering the layout, but where it needs to be augmented with a more intelligent server and a more intelligent content management system, and then a simple strategy to identify which, at least at a high level, which route to go down, and then some of the considerations for the future, and Although I can't answer all the questions, I'm not going to sit here and say, in 10 years' time it's going to be like this. I think we can say with some certainty TV is going to be the next major device that we're going to be interacting with, and we're going to be doing that with gestures and a little bit of voice. And then we've got heads-up displays, glasses, and a more kind of speech-driven world after that. So thank you all very much for your time. Tom, are we able to take questions?
We are.
Or feedback?
Yeah, we would love. I'd encourage people to go ahead and ask any questions they may have. In talking to a few of the attendees, James, one of the questions that I've heard is, can you talk a little bit around, what are 2 or 3 skills that you think the developer out there today should really start looking at and make sure that they have as part of their tool set? Would you recommend any specific skills that developers should be thinking of? Obviously, as mobile is becoming even hotter, as we move forward.
Yes. So responsive design is absolutely something that a developer looking at their CV and wanting to be more valuable and keeping up with the changing technology needs to be aware of. So CSS3 is, and things like places like W3 School, for example, is a great resource in helping understand the capabilities of that technology, and specifically looking at the media queries where you can effectively put logic into your CSS now to make certain decisions based on what the device is capable of, and being aware of what that can do. The other thing is, I don't know if everyone on the call uses Kentico, but I'm guessing some of you do. Look at the ability to change the layout based on the type of device. The guys at Kentico have done a great job in integrating the intelligence that 51 Degrees provides into the Kentico product, and being able to make those macro level decisions on the server will save you a lot of time in development and in testing, because you'll be able to focus your development on testing on a particular form factor. So if you create a website, if you create your layout for the mobile device, you can test on a limited range of mobile devices and be comfortable it's going to work on those areas. If you then make a change to that layout just in the mobile layout, then you know it's only affecting those types of devices. You don't have to then go and test on the desktop and all the different browsers and check that one line of the 1,000 lines of CSS that you've got that make up your website hasn't broken something elsewhere. And that's a really kind of key kind of message that I get coming back from those businesses that have sort of tried to embrace responsive design. Is just the effort that's involved in ongoing maintenance and testing. So use those tools, and then the other thing I would say to do is look at HTML5, and you can make your life a lot easier using, if you're able to, and by that I mean your organization supports this, so you don't have policies that prevent it, and you've also done the analysis to look at the types of device. But HTML5 is becoming very, very popular. It's a great way of delivering video and audio. So on the phonecast.com, we switched all our players over to HTML5 6 months ago, and we haven't noticed a drop-off in traffic, because, and perhaps it's because we appeal to a technical audience, but the majority of the devices that are coming onto the website now support HTML5. So that's a great way to just very effectively get content out there now without having to mess around with all sorts of third-party plugins. And there's some other good HTML5 elements to have a look at as well when you get a moment.
Good. And one of the other kind of questions that I had gotten was, you talked a little bit about content formats, and I think you called it flexible content. One of the things people were interested in understanding is, when you talk about that, are you talking about kind of the infamous long blog posts versus short blog posts? and video versus audio, or were you kind of talking about something different? And then did you have any recommendations as to what you think may work better on the mobile device?
Well, I think it's a great question. So flexible content is about ensuring your content is not dependent on other things, which generally means keep it as simple as possible. So the content you're putting into your CMS system, it doesn't rely on a certain layout or a certain screen size, for example. It's clear. So again, within HTML5, there's a lot more metadata tags that are available, for example. So it's making it clear where headings are, for example, and therefore what your layout engine can do is look at those headings and intelligently decide, okay, that blog post, which if printed would be, let's say, 3 pages of printed paper, it can see where the headings are, and it can make an intelligent decision about how many pages to structure that over on a mobile device, on a small screen device. So it's building that kind of thinking into the way that we're managing and structuring our data today. And Tom, perhaps you can tell me, does Kentico have the ability to add that metadata to content? I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It will do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always one of those things where marketers are always trying to figure out, I think, what's the best way to present content, and then obviously getting the reader to come back and then getting the reader to engage, right, is always the big questions that we hear about. So, and it looks like, unfortunately, we're a little bit over our time, but James, I definitely appreciate you presenting this information, and we got some great questions and feedback from folks. And then once again, if they wanted to get more information on 51 Degrees Mobi, obviously Kentico CMS 7, we've integrated it in and leverage it. Where else should they take a look? Your website at 51 Degrees Mobi, is there anywhere they can find slides and things?
They will be able to if you come onto the website from later on today. Under blogs, you'll see the material that we put up today.
Excellent. And as always, barring any technical issues, we're recording this, and we will look to post it up on our website. James, once again, thanks for joining, and everyone have a great day, and we'll go ahead and end our webinar right now. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time.